Thank you, Kyle, and thank you for having me tonight. Actually, there are quite a few people here who I know personally. Thank you all, friends, for coming, and strangers for coming out on a cold night. This is nothing compared to Sado in the middle of the winter. This is tame. This is a spring day on the Sado Island. So I'm not quite sure of the makeup of the audience, so I have a prepared speech or sort of talk that is a little bit flexible depending on what you want to hear about most. And I'm going to talk about the... is this okay? Is this working? Yeah. I'm going to talk about what we call the development process of the film, but I'm also going to talk a little bit from a producer's point of view about the actual nuts and bolts of producing a film like this in Japan, which is a certain kind of film which people are recently referring to as a regional film. Like jizake or something, like a regional sake or regional beer. So I was thinking that I would talk for the first 15 minutes or so about that kind of part of the process, which is more about people and personalities and politics and money than it is about creativity. And then for the next 20 minutes or so about the actual creative development part of developing the story and casting a film like this. And then a little bit more broadly about what I see going on in the Japanese film industry at the moment. And I don't know to what extent people are particularly interested in that that subject area. And all of these things I can expand on depending on what kind of people are here tonight. So I'm going to talk maybe for about 40 minutes altogether, and leave quite a lot of space for more interactive question and answer afterwards. So I'd like to start with an anecdote about something that happened to me when I was a student in I think my third year. I was teaching English to a young Italian guy called Nicola to get some extra pocket money to fund my beer habit. And this student film theatre was showing Empire of the Senses by Sheman, who passed away recently. Ai no Corrida. I can see some people nodding, they know the film. It's, some people have described it as a porn film. It has real sex in it, it's very explicit. He was asked by a French producer to make a porn film. It's a beautiful film, very beautiful blacks in the screen. He had said, I want to banish green from the screen to black and red. Powerful performances by Japanese actors. One of the great classics of Japanese cinema, Empire of the Senses. So I said to Nicola, I'm going to go and see this film tonight in the college theatre. And he said, oh yeah, I really want to see that film. I thought, well, that's amazing. You're an 18-year-old guy from the countryside in Italy. How come you've heard of this obscure? That's you've got hidden sides to you. So anyway, I went along with Nicola to see the film. Quite soon, within the film, the couple start to have sex and continue to have more and more sex. And Nicola was kind of squirming away in the seat next to him. And I was like, what the hell's going on? He said he really wanted to see this film. I hope he's, I hope he's all right. I hope these groans and moans are not what I think they are. And we came out of the theatre. I said, Nicola, what's wrong? And he said, I said we were going to see Empire of the Senses. And he said, yeah, no, I thought we were going to see Empire Strikes Back. And actually the anecdote has a kind of point, because my film has been described as a science fiction film, and also has been described as a kind of throwback to 1960s experimental Japanese cinema. So it's kind of the Empire of the Senses strikes back. But the other point, and something that I want to talk about a little bit, is slightly more academic point, is the experience of watching a film, going into the cinema and seeing a film with expectations of seeing one kind of film and then actually halfway through or quite soon realizing that you're not watching the film that you thought you were going to see. And I think if you're lucky, that happens to you a couple of times in your life, and it can be a really interesting experience. And it happened to me when I first encountered what is called loosely art cinema. When I first saw films like Dersu Uzala by Kurosawa and Agira, Wrath of God by Werner Herzog, suddenly I was seeing, cinema that is not like the dominant, in inverted commas, the dominant Hollywood model. A cinema which I must confess I love dearly, and so I'm not one of these people who's going to say all Hollywood films are crap, and I don't like that kind of commercialism, because I think Hollywood films are sometimes very interesting and very intelligent. But there is this other cinema, there is this this mysterious cinema that sometimes uses a different language and a whole different way of seeing things. And I think it's a cinema that's slowly being squeezed out. And I think it's important that it shouldn't be squeezed out. And that has something to do with some of the themes in my film as well. Anyway, that's all a bit of a long preamble to showing you the trailer of the film, which starts tomorrow, the 16th, in Eurospace, that runs for 3 weeks. So if you can't make it tomorrow, you have 3 weeks to come along. I'll just show you the trailer to start with. Thanks.
変革の時はすでに始まっている。口の雨のように雷騒ぎ恐ろしき、そのよう重い白玉、何ぞとといし人までも我が身の上になり生きようがたりの恥ずかしい。
What's going on with the colors here? It's supposed to be blue. Very, very weird. Oh, we tested it earlier on. Now it's got blue.
逆らえば踏み殺す。俺がこの島の法律だ。その嵐を起こしたのは鬼のせいだって。変革の時はすでに始まっている。口の雨のように雷騒ぎ恐ろしき、そのよう重い白玉、何ぞとといし人までも我が身の上になり生きようがたりの恥ずかしい。君はただの操り人形だ。この島にはもう15年以上春が来ていない。終わりのないですな。逆らえば踏み殺す。俺がこの島の法律だ。その嵐を起こしたのは鬼のせいだって。アンテニオが暴れ狂うみたいな感じだったよ。その歌は何かを変える力がある。鬼が俺をここへ導いた。この島にも二度といない。俺に何を望んでる。はやはや抱いたまんです。どうやら奴は俺への復讐を企てている。私の気持ちは憎しみに支配されていた。春になると鬼が戻る。春を連れ戻して。はやはや歌いたまるし。
that's the kind of film it is. What kind of film is that? Well, it's a rock and roll science fiction version of The Tempest turned upside down on Sado Island, of course. And of course, I was just wandering along the street one day, and I thought about 3 years ago, and I thought to myself, I know, I'll make a rock and roll science fiction version of The Tempest turned upside down set on Sado Island. No, that's not exactly what happened. It took a very long time for it to actually sort of turn into this rather strange beast that it is. And so that's what I'm going to talk about to start with, is how this happened in terms of the kind of production and development process. And I have to go back to 2008 and fill in a little bit of backstory. I had been working for METI, for the Keisan Show, for about 3 years on a project called J-Pitch, which was a project to help Japanese producers set up international co-productions. So Japanese producers who wanted to produce with other countries had projects, they would bring them, we would select the ones we thought had a possibility of coming to fruition, and we guided the producers through a series of steps, including legal steps and story development and taking them to markets to pitch the films. And it was very interesting and very exciting, and it was very, very difficult because it's actually very, very hard to co-produce with Japan for various reasons, including technical reasons, which I won't go into in too much detail here because I think that's a bit boring, but if you're interested I can elaborate on that. Anyway, most of the films never actually saw the light of day. 1 or 2 of them did, but the producers, more than anything else, learned that it was very hard to co-produce with other countries, and the foreign co-producers learned it was very hard to co-produce with Japan. And in the meantime, I had also been developing 2 co-production projects, one of which I really wanted to direct, and the other of which I was sort of happy to sign off as a script project, both of which I really loved. One of which was a very traditional Japanese-style horror film with a foreign protagonist, and the other was the real story about the Cameroonian football team who stayed in a tiny little village in Kyushu during the World Cup about 8 years ago. It was a comedy. It was a very funny and actually a true story, because the Cameroonian team kept not turning up for various reasons, and the village was waiting and waiting for these Cameroonians to turn up. And eventually, after a lot of kerfuffle, they finally made it to play one very moving game of soccer with the local high school team. Both the projects collapsed partly because of the difficulties of doing co-production, and also because of the kind of general economic downturn. So 2008, and then the Lehman shock, and at that point, Keisan Show had got bored with co-productions. I mean, it's one of the really irritating things dealing with the bureaucracy in Japan, that these kind of short-term projects that should really be long-term projects just get dropped. And then the next thing was regional film. Let's put all our efforts into regional film. We started to hear these rumours that that METI was interested in supporting more regional film. And I went to an event which was called the Regional Film Commission Fair in a school in Shinjuku, where film commissions from all over Japan came to try and persuade filmmakers to come and shoot in their region, bringing with them gifts such as local sake and local miso and things like that, and plying the filmmakers with them and saying, come and shoot a film here, and you'll be able to eat this miso, drink this sake every night. And Sado, the guy from Sado was very charming, and he showed me a book of photographs taken by a photographer called Amano, I've forgotten his first name, of the primal forest in the center of the island, which I didn't know existed. I knew that there was one in Yakushima, but I didn't know there was one in Sado. And as soon as I saw these trees, I thought, oh, well, I'd really like to go and see this. This looks like an absolutely wonderful location. I had no idea that it's basically a 7-hour walk up a mountain to get to this location, which makes things rather difficult. And then you have to go 2.5 hours by boat across the sea, and sometimes when it's rough, the boats get cancelled all day long, and all those other kind of logistical problems which I was about to discover about shooting a film on Sado Island. But with the spirit of just, well, you know, 2 projects have collapsed, we've got nothing to do. Me and my young producer who was working in my company said, let's go and have a few days on Sado and drink some sake and maybe, you know, swim in the sea, and you know, hell, if we don't make a film, at least we'll have had a holiday and we'll come back refreshed. And as we got to Sado, and the first thing that the guys from the Film Commission did was take us to the Toki Center. Do you know about the reintroduction of the Toki, the Japanese ibis? I think it's called the Japanese ibis. Is that right, Karen?
I think so, yeah.
Karen's in Japan. So we were taken to the Toki Center, and obviously they thought it would be very nice to make a film about the reintroduction of the Toki. Now, in a way, it's, I don't know if you've seen, how many people have seen the Toki? The Japanese are good, okay. It's a very ugly bird. When not moving, the Toki is not cinematic at all. It sort of hunches like a vulture and looks very miserable. And when flying, I discovered actually last year, when the film was completed and we showed it on Sado to thank people, and I saw the Toki flying. Actually, it is a very beautiful and cinematic bird, and I finally understood why people were very excited about this and about it coming back. But at the time, I just thought, well, I don't want to, you know, make a film about a bunch of stuffed vultures. However, coming back to this thing about regional film, it might have been a very good idea to do this, because this is how regional film sort of traditionally works in Japan. A producer from Tokyo goes to a region where they think that the local authorities or the local businesses have some money left over, and they come and they say, we really love your Toki, and we want to make a film about the Toki, and we want to get everybody in the community excited about this so that they will give us lots of money to make our film. And then they go to the, first of all, they go to the mayor, who says, we don't have any money. I've been through this process a lot. But we can introduce you to some business people who do have some money. We will give it our seal of approval. You should talk to the governor. So then you go up the food chain to the governor. When the governor, if the subject is the Toki, the ibis, and the reintroduction of the bird to Sado, and it's a perfectly safe, nice film, then the governor will say, I give it my seal of approval, and he will start talking to his friends, and then people in the media will start paying attention to you, and then the word will get out, and some key business people will say, okay, we would like to give some soft money to the film. And up to, traditionally, that way you can raise sometimes $1 million quite quickly, just from soft money, from donations from business. But it has to be really the kind of film that is going to absolutely not offend anybody in any way. That you can show to your grandmother, and you can show to, you know, the local bigwigs, and everybody is going to say, yes, that's a beautiful film about the reintroduction of the Toki. So, I mean, had I been sensible and had I been thinking like a producer, I should probably have got very excited about the Japanese ibis and said, yes, I'll cook up a story. And it would have gone something like this. There's a young woman in Tokyo who's fed up of her job in the office and is split up with her boyfriend, and she takes it into her head one day to go to Sado, where she loses her wallet and ends up, or her purse, and ends up in the Toki Center, where she meets a charming older man who tells her all about his struggles to reintroduce the bird. And so she decides to stay there and to get involved in reintroducing the birds to the island. She struggles and falls in love, and also falls in love with the local culture and people. The bird is successfully reintroduced after being occasionally eaten by tanukis. And then at the end of the film, it flies beautifully in the sunset, and she stands on a hill with tears in her eyes and her new boyfriend on Sado at her side. And you can write this film It's not too difficult to write this film. I could have probably done it in my sleep. You know, maybe being slightly facetious, but I think you could probably raise the money on that too. I don't know, what it is, but I mean, I just balked at the idea of doing something like that. I thought I will be faking it if I do this. This is not the kind of cinema that interests me. This is not the kind of, even though it may be a very good film, and a good director could probably make a good film out of this, probably. And people do like this, but do I really, really want to do? Is this something that really interests me? Not really. After the Toki Center, the film commission people took us to see Seisuiji, which is an abandoned temple in the middle of the island. It's a small version of Kiyomizu Temple that's actually falling into disrepair. It hasn't been looked after for about 30 years. It's really astonishingly beautiful in a Japanese aesthetic way. It's the beauty of decay and time, eating away at something that was already beautiful that has now become more beautiful through decaying. And I just thought, wow, this is a location. I don't know what the film is, but this is definitely a location. And I think that was probably the first. It was there that I probably thought Tempest for the first time. Maybe Tempest had that kind of slightly mystical atmosphere. Anyway, we spent several days on the island. I learned about I'm not going to go into details about Sado's history. Please visit Sado if you haven't, because it really is a completely fascinating place. There's a gold mine which used to be the main producer of gold for Japan, so it was incredibly rich. That gold mine, of course, is closed down and is now a museum. It is the place where dissident figures from Japanese history were exiled, people such as the Emperor Juntoku, who tried to overthrow the shogunate during the Kamakura period, Zeami, the Noh playwright, who has left all this Noh culture on the island, Nichiren, the Buddhist dissident, and of course there are other stories of exile, some of them much darker to do with the island as well. So it has this history of what's called Shima Nagashi. Everybody here have you heard the term Shima Nagashi? Shima Nagashi, I can see somebody, my friend Noriko is kind of squirming. Shima Nagashi is one of those words you are not allowed to say on NHK. I discovered the other day when I was on an NHK program, they said, you mustn't say Shima Nagashi. I already knew that because I had been told that 1,000 times on Sado by people. Don't say Shima Nagashi, say Tsuiho. Or you can say Nagasareta, but don't say Shima Nagashi. Because it's like an insult. It's the way that the people on Sado feel, obviously, when they hear this word, is as if they are being accused of being penal convicts or something like that, which is not exactly what Shima Nagashi was, in fact. But that is how people feel about it, and they don't like it. Shimaokuri is, of course, nicer, yes. In my naivety, though, because after I had visited, after the first visit to the island, I decided that one of the things I was really interested in was the story of this Emperor Juntoku, who had been exiled there in 1242 and died at the age of 46. And I think it was partly because I was 46 at the time. I had this sort of strange, what would it be like if I was exiled somewhere, like Japan, for example, and died. Juntoku apparently achieved enlightenment before dying, which I also thought was rather interesting. He was one of the few people who didn't come back. Zeami did come back. Nichiren did come back to the mainland. Juntoku didn't. He apparently stayed on the island and saw a flower one day and achieved enlightenment and died. That's the nice version of the story. The less nice version of the story, which people whisper, is that he actually killed himself. But you can't, again, this is one of the things you can't say because it's related to the imperial family, etc., etc. So to talk about. So these things that were interesting me, obviously, were not the kinds of things that are easy to make a regional film about, because the first draft of the script that I wrote had the title Sheman. That didn't go down too well with the film commission. They said, perhaps you better change the title. I said, why? This is a great title. And then, but gradually I began to understand that, there were sensibilities involved, and I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. I was becoming very friendly with the guys in the film commission. I said, sure, okay, well, I can live with changing the title. But it's not, I'd set myself a bit of a problem here, because instead of doing the Toki film, which would have been an easy, now in retrospect, an easy set of steps to take to get the money to make the film, and then to get the various local bodies behind the film to finance the film, I had chosen to go this other route and do something that was obviously very hard to explain to people there. I wanted to do something about Juntoku, but Juntoku is actually a rock and roll star. Puzzled expression. I wanted to do an adaptation of the Tempest. Actually, Ninagawa, the theatre director, had done a version of the Tempest. It was a Sado-themed Tempest. It was almost around the time I came to Japan, and I didn't know that until after we finished the film. So it's not such a strange idea to do the Tempest on Sado. But of course, most people in Japan don't really, they know Shakespeare, and they may know the plots, and they do know Leonardo DiCaprio is Romeo, and stuff like that. But like British people, and like most people everywhere, Shakespeare is still obscure to most people, which is fine. I'm not a Shakespeare expert myself either. It's not as if I'm somebody who's steeped in the classics and wants to kind of revivify that. So, but there were hurdles involved in terms of the material. But still, the more I went to Sado, and I think I went there for about at least 20 times over 3 years before the filming, the more I thought, all this really interesting cultural history that has been left here is different. It's different from the rest of Japan. There's a palpable sense of variety and oddness, idiosyncrasy, difference, whatever you want to call it, that is so strikingly unlike the homogenization that seems to be happening in the mainstream media and culture. And I've noticed it, having lived here for 24 years, everything seems to be becoming more and more same. Now that's not just a Japanese problem, I know that's a global problem. It's partly about globalization. I'm not one of these foreigners who thinks that Japan is a homogeneous society. I don't think Japan is a homogeneous society, and I don't think it's ever been a homogeneous society. But I think that there is a global tendency that's kind of accelerated here because of the symbiosis between the kind of commercial sameness and the way that the bureaucracy works. That's rather disturbing, and I see it in the young people that I teach as well, a sort of disconnect. And I thought, well, what's interesting about this island, what's interesting to me, is this thorny otherness. And it's the thorny otherness that I felt when I was seeing the other kind of cinema that I liked when I first saw the films by Herzog or by Odessa Ursula by Kurosawa. And I thought, what I really want to do is try and capture that. I think that if Sado has something to give, that is what it is. And so, through a long process of talking to the film commission guys, we managed, they came on board. They basically kind of agreed. They were kind of young guys working at the, not at the top level of the city hall, but in the junior positions in the film commission. But they understood that anyway, since there isn't a theatre on Sado, half of the population is over 60 anyway. Making a sort of very kind of bland regional film was maybe not the way to go. and so they supported me. And I'm very kind of grateful to the guys there for doing that and allowing me to do something quite wacky. Maybe we should see, maybe that's really enough for talking about the production part of it. Maybe we should see some clips. Just to give you a flavour of some of the places on the island. Maybe we'll start with the forest. There's a flashback sequence in the film which is actually in the primal forest, which is in the centre of the island. And of course you can't, we shot most of this film in the winter time, in March, and you can't get there, you can't go up the mountain to the forest. I mean, you can hike up there, but it's going to take you, probably the whole day to get up there in the snow. And you certainly couldn't take a crew up there, a film crew up there in the winter time. So let's just look at the first forest scene. That's the forest, and maybe you can see Seisuji, the temple which was the place that we visited after going to the Toki Center.
あんたは誰だ。かつてこの島に追放されたものだ。鬼が俺をここへ導いた。この島に鬼などいない。とっくに絶滅した。俺は確かに鬼だ。幻覚を見るまでになってしまったのか。私についてきなさい。
So that's the you get a better sense of it when you see it on the screen in the movie theatre, and of course you get a much better sense of it if you go there. Has anybody here actually been to Sado? Oh, good, some people at the back. Yeah, did you visit Seisuji? Definitely, I would put it on your list, everybody's list of things to visit, just to see that flight of stone steps going up between the cedar trees. It really is really incredibly beautiful. And I've seen it in all the seasons. It's lovely in the summertime with the cicadas kind of buzzing. It's also really stunning in the winter when it's snowing. And when the snow falls, really, because it's right up in the hills, so it's completely silent. And so when the snow falls, it falls with this very eerie, slow motion silence, and you just feel as if time is slowing down completely. And unfortunately, that happened during the pre-production period, about 10 days before the shoot, so I wasn't able to capture that snow on screen. It's like just one of those moments that's gone. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the. Maybe should we have a little few questions now, and then I'll talk about creative stuff, or would that be really irregular? This kind of thing. Or shall I just keep going about the creative stuff? Okay.
If you want to go on for like 20 more minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Then I'll talk about a little bit about the creative development rather than the producing side. So what I had picked up in that first what is called in Japan scenario hunting, script hunting. I don't think I don't know what people say. What do people say? In Britain, I don't think that concept exists. So there's scouting, but not scouting for. Anyway, it's a kind of scouting, but scouting actually for the script and the idea itself, rather than the scouting that is done when the script is finished. And what I picked up, what I was interested in, was Juntoku, and I thought I definitely want to make a film that has Juntoku as the central character. It's a story about an exile, and it's a story about an exiled artist, because Juntoku was a poet. And it's a story about an artist who can't create and can't go back. How do I make that into an interesting story? Well, one of the first ideas I had on the ferry on the way back was I'll set it in the future. I'll make it. I won't do a period film with Juntoku in the Kamakura period, because obviously I'm not going to get the money to finance that film ever. But I'll set it in the near future and make him a rock and roll singer. So I had that idea, and I had also the idea that I wanted somehow to incorporate the Oni into the story, the demons, because Sado has this tradition of Oni Daiko. It's a dance and a drumming ceremony that is performed mostly in the springtime, which has various interpretations, but quite a lot of the stories, I think, seem to come from the No tradition, and each village has different versions and variations of the dance. And it's quite stunning, because actually most of them are really pretty good, but then one day they took me to see what they said was the best Oni Daiko team on the island. And they performed, they were rehearsing, and they were pretty good as well. And then the guy who was leading the troupe said, well, you really ought to see my dad do this, because he's actually the best at the dance. I said, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to perform. I'm too old to do this. Then we had some sakes together and some more sakes. And eventually he was persuaded to get up and dance without the mask. And I was astonished at the difference between what the dad in his 60s, maybe 70s was doing and what the younger people were doing. Obviously, I mean, the tradition is sort of dying a little bit. The father was amazing. Without a mask, he transfixed all of us. He sprained his leg doing it after drinking too much sake, and then claimed he wasn't going to do it again for another year. But it was something very, very special. So, and he said something that really reverberated with me, because I asked him, I said, well, how do you kind of pass on the tradition? And he said, everybody has to become the devil in their own way. Everybody has to become their own demon. Of course, there are forms, but everybody has to become their own demon. And I thought, wow, that's worth remembering. And I was fascinated by these demons and what they represent. And I kept thinking about not just, obviously this is not the devil, this is not a Christian devil, this is more like the daemon figure in poetry. This is the creative energy, this is the creative force with its dual energy of both incredible destructiveness, but also the power to release you and to bring art into the world if you can harness it and if you can treat it right. And it's a tradition that exists all over the world. And I think, I'm pretty sure that the Sado tradition is at least part of that tradition. So I wanted to do that, but I was also struggling with making this story interesting. And that's when the Tempest idea that I thought about briefly in the temple and then again in the forest resurfaced. And I thought, I'll abandon the Juntoku story and I'll go to Shakespeare because he knows what he's talking about and he's got a nice plot, and I'll just use that and I'll set the Tempest on Sado and I'll just do a straight version. I'll forget about Juntoku. Maybe I'll be able to introduce him as a sort of side character. But I'll go with the Tempest. So I started working on an adaptation of the Tempest, a very straight adaptation. And I discovered, although I knew the play quite well, I'd actually been in the play as a student actor. It's a play with a lot of problems, I think. It's very expository at the beginning. It has about 20 minutes of Prospero telling Miranda the story of how they arrived at the island. Very uncinematic. Prospero is a strangely unconvincing central character, I think, because he controls everything. And so what's the drama? I mean, well, there's no real doubt that Prospero is the strongest person on the island. He's defeated the witch Sycorax, he's enslaved Ariel and Caliban, he's able to bring his enemies there with the storm. Well, who am I going to get worried about in the story? Miranda is a sort of waif-like, innocent, childlike figure who's very uninteresting, I think, to a modern woman, or as a modern woman. She's not a compelling character. And by far the most interesting characters in the play are Caliban and Ariel, to me. Caliban, the alleged brute who has been taught language only to find out that he can't do anything with it and overthrow his masters, and Ariel, the entrapped spirit. So I was having a hard time doing my adaptation of The Tempest too, because I wasn't really believing in, much as I like the play, and much as I have enjoyed versions of the play, I wasn't believing that a film version of this was going to work. And at some point, I sort of took the two different scripts I've been working on and started sliding them together, and sliding the Juntoku story into the Tempest story, and seeing it from his point of view as if he was Ferdinand, and saying, okay, I'm going to take the Shakespeare play and I'm going to turn it upside down. What if everything had gone wrong? What if the storm hadn't worked out? What if Caliban did manage to make Miranda his wife, as he plans to do in the play? What if Ariel had escaped? What if Prospero had been overthrown? What if the play had broken down and now had to be put together again by some inner force that would pull everything back together, and that could only be the demons? And so that's basically the shape of the film that I came up with. And it's, honestly, it's a hybrid. It's a hybrid film. It's a yokai. It's not human, and it's not an animal. It's an odd hybrid creature. I know that, but in a way, I'm very happy about that, because that reminds me of Nicola and his encounter with the Empire of the Senses, and it reminds me of my first encounter with a strange and rich cinema that was like a portal into a new and interesting universe for me when I was a 14-year-old boy in Wales. And on that note, I'll come to the last clip, which is the only bit of Shakespeare, really, the text of Shakespeare that's left, which is Ariel's song, which is left in the film. This version is not quite as in control of everything throughout as he seems to be in the Shakespeare play. So yeah, maybe that's probably enough for the time being. Maybe I should wrap it up a little bit just by saying, obviously in the process of going through the actual production steps of developing the film and also the kind of creative steps of developing the film, there were two things. There were those two aspects. The kind of my encounter with a quite conservative and quite conservative Japanese rural society and bureaucracy, which in some ways is quite representative of some of the bigger things going on in this country, I think, and the themes of the original play. Were sort of playing off each other in ways that I was aware of right from the start of the script writing process. I don't want to say too much about it, except that at all stages I was thinking, this is really a film about Japan now. This is really, you know, not just an adaptation of the Tempest. This is not just a Sado Island film. This is actually my reflection, a little bit of my reflection on what's going on in the country at the moment, and a message. And interestingly enough, and I thought people might not get that, but interestingly enough, some people who have seen the film so far seem to have really responded to that and say, yes, oh, okay, I can see exactly what you're trying to say here, or I think I understand what you're trying to say here about some of the things that are problematic in Japan at the moment. Is that enough for now? Okay, thank you.
Everybody, because we're recording, we ask that you use the microphone. Even though we can hear you, it doesn't get picked up. Sorry to go back to not creative question, but again the producing. Your comment about very hard to co-produce in Japan.
Yes.
Quite interested in that, both for the technical reasons you suggested might be there, and also just for other reasons. And whether you have any experience or view whether it's more difficult perhaps to co-produce here than it is in, let's say, China.
I'm not an expert on China, but I think it's much easier in China. From what I understand, it's much easier in China because there are some channels that have been set up by the Chinese government and companies in Hong Kong. If you have a Hong Kong partner, it makes it easier to do a co-production with China. I mean, just to give you a very short list of what the problems are in terms of co-producing with Japan, the speed of the development process doesn't match with European, for example, development processes or American development processes where you might spend 5 or 6 years getting the script right, putting everything together. Japanese producers and Japanese production companies work at a much faster speed normally. A lot of the legal things don't quite fit, and a lot of independent producers don't have the money to do legal work, and so they can't do very simple things like kind of make sure that they've got the option on their book pinned down for the right amount of time to do the development. The scale of the budgets don't match. I mean, if you want to co-produce New Zealand, you're better off doing a $15 million film. I mean, New Zealand won't even co-produce with you unless you're above $4 million. Most Japanese films, you know, that's a big budget film in Japan, $4 million. So, you know, it's still a cheapy industry, even in the major studios compared to other countries, which is very surprising for a country with such an amazing cinema and a rich cinema. But it doesn't, you know, the amounts of money spent on film here are very small compared to that spent on film in China. So, I mean, that's a quick list. There are about 20 key problems that need to be fixed. And then there's another problem, which is, you know, what's a co-production? Even if you can make a co-production work technically, it's not necessarily going to work for an audience, because there has to be proper co-production. It should really work for both sides. So very often you end up with what they call a project that I've been working on for the last 6 years, which is a German-Japanese co-production. It looks as if it will become a majority German co-production. So they will end up putting up 80% of the money.
Thanks for your presentation, John. Sorry. Can I ask a quick question? Did you get all of the funding that you needed from the local authorities? And afterwards, did you feel, or do you feel some obligation or burden to them with this product?
No, I feel a tremendous obligation to them, but we didn't really get any funding at all from Sado. Most of the hard money came from Hong Kong, the UK, and some private money here, and it was mostly hard money. What we did get was a tremendous amount of cooperation, in-kind cooperation. For example, there was a hotel on Sado that said, okay, well, nobody's staying here, so you can stay here. If everybody pays 1,000 yen a night, you can stay here for the whole time. And then the Sado Film Commission said, well, we have a subsidy that will cover up to 1,000 yen a night. So, you know, so that's huge. I mean, that ended up being, you know, worth 2 million yen. And then we had a film school that donated the whole, all of their grip equipment and everything. So there's about, most of the hard money is from outside Japan, and everything else was sort of in kind and sort of wrangled services and people doing us favors, and which is worth often a lot more than money. And so I mean, I really have a tremendous sense of obligation to the guys in Sado, not just the guys in the film commission, but all the people who supported us. There's a sake brewery who gave us sake every night for free, which is, you know, when you have a freezing cold crew, that is very important.
Hi, back to the creative questions.
Yeah.
I'm wondering where the rock and roll fits in.
The rock and roll.
And also in the Tempest, there's quite a bit of humor.
Yes.
And I didn't see any sort of lighter moments in the clips. And I wonder if that was part of turning the Tempest on its head, or.
There is a little bit of humor in this too. It's not in the. It's not. There is a character who is one of the comic characters who I think is very funny. first of all, the rock and roll. The rock and roll was because I wanted something. I wanted it to be about an artist, but an artist who is a rebel. And Juntoku was, well, maybe he wasn't a rebel poet, but he was a rebel of sorts. And so that rock and roll singer seemed appropriate. The other thing that was always in my mind was that I thought, I want to make a film that young people can watch. I don't want to make a film that is academic. So this I think works as a prison break movie. If you don't know Shakespeare, if you don't know Sado, you can watch it as a strange prison break movie about a rock and roll band who gets sent to an island, and people get shot and people get beaten up, and you've got your prison break stuff going on. And hopefully then that will will keep the young people involved in the story, and then they might watch it again and say, oh wait a minute, there's some other stuff going on. I wonder what this. So that's what the rock and roll was. I mean, it's partly about appealing to a certain audience. There was slightly more humour, but some of it I cut out because I felt the film was a bit too long. There's a marvellous actor called Tsuchiya Ryota who plays one of the guards, who's slightly comical, and he's a brilliant comic actor. And he did have one or two scenes which unfortunately have gone, which I loved, but they didn't quite seem right. I mean, it's already a bit of a hodgepodge, so they kind of toned it down. But I think there are a couple of small laughs left in it.
Can I ask again, sir?
Sure.
What about the script itself?
Yeah.
Did you write it in English and have it translated into Japanese?
Yeah, I always write in English because I can't get into the zone in Japanese. Yeah.
And after that, were you comfortable enough to appraise the Japanese translation and satisfy yourself with that?
Yes.
Or did you just let it go then?
No, I always work with the translator quite carefully, and I talk to the translator, and then I talk to the actors, and we do read-throughs, and if it doesn't sound right, or if it doesn't, I double-check what I was intending with the English. Sometimes I will add little things that come out of improvisation that the actors have said. But one very interesting thing that happened with the script was Honda Hirotaro, who plays the Prospero character, Omuro. I took the script the first time I had a script meeting with him. He was sitting opposite me, and he went through it with a red line, and he said, I don't want to say this. I don't want to say this. No, I don't want to say this. And his manager was sitting up to my left, and his manager was kind of trembling and sweating and looking at me. So when's this director going to blow up? And I started giggling, and I was just, this is so interesting. So, this is a great actor. He doesn't want to say the lines. He wants to do stuff. He wants to, he wants to explore it without it. And he said, there's too much exposition in your script. I said, yeah, I agree. It's like I always have that problem. I usually cut it out on the editing room floor. You're doing my job for me. So it's good. I mean, that's that kind of process. I like that kind of process. I like that. I don't think that, I think a script should be very, very, very strong before you get anywhere near talking to the actors about it. But then good actors will really lift it, and I think they can do good creative stuff simply by cutting lines sometimes.
What's your distribution plans internationally? Festivals, or how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's got a distributor sales agent in London who's working on a festival strategy. It's been to a festival in London. We're hoping to get a small theatrical run in the art house circuit in Britain. We've got some festivals coming up this year. I'm not allowed to say some of them yet, but one of them is in Brazil. It's a fantastic film festival in Brazil. I always thought right from the beginning that this was a film that might not do the traditional festival route, because there is a sort of Japanese cinema that works within the Berlin, Cannes, Rotterdam, Locarno circuit, and I thought this is not that kind of film. So I was aware of that, and I was thinking, if we can go to some festivals, that will help us within Japan. And within Japan, it's basically, again, it's the art house circuit, so it opens in Eurospace tomorrow. And then it's booked into cinemas in Niigata and Nagoya and Kansai, and then hopefully we'll do about 20 mini theatres. And then I'll kind of reprise it in the halls, I think. You know, I'll take it around halls, you know, the places that have screening facilities, and try and show it and try and talk about it. So it's very much, it's a hands-on, more or less self-distribution. I mean, the company that I set up to make my previous films has done some distribution, and I thought, having worked with distribution companies and not always had happy experiences, I thought we would give this a try. To be honest, it's much better to have a distribution company, I think. I'm not sure if I'll do this again. It's so much hard work. It's really, really, really a different skill. But on the other hand, yeah, distribution companies these days are asking, you know, the production companies to put up money so that they can do their jobs. And so that means that you're having to pay people that, unless it's unless it's been set up within a studio system. So it's an interesting new challenge.
Hi.
Hi.
I just want to know how much does language and like being able to speak Japanese works in making a Japanese film in the film industry. Thank you.
That's a good question. I don't think Clint Eastwood speaks any Japanese. And he made a great film in Japanese. I'm not quite sure how he did that. I think he worked very closely with the actors. I've always personally thought that it's crazy to try to make a film in another language unless you speak that language and at least understand it. But even after I've been here, even though I've been here for 25 years, I still have sometimes moments of doubt as to judging performance, for example. Judging the performance of an actor is a very delicate thing because there are different acting styles, and so sometimes it's not about language at all. It's about your taste in acting, and that's quite difficult to convey even in words. And sometimes I think it actually helps not to speak, because if you, I mean, to a certain extent, when I made my first film, and I was much less proficient in Japanese, I worked with young actors, and I worked with them in a very kind of close physical way, doing lots of improvisation, sort of feeling out, and they were getting my kind of body signals that I wasn't happy with what they were doing, and we built up a trust. And that is, when you build up that kind of non-verbal trust with people, I think you can get really interesting performances. Whereas when you work with professional actors and you're having to do most things very verbally and having to be very precise, and you've got time pressures, then it becomes, perhaps even when you're doing it in your own language, I think it can be, when I read lots and lots of interviews with directors, and lots of directors talk about how hard this process is of conveying what you're trying to get out of an actor. And you do really need time. And that's very often the problem, rather than the language. It's not having the time to talk through who the characters are, and talk through the backstories, and to explore things. So that's a bit of a garbled answer. I think it's really important. I think it's really important to be able to speak the language, to do it. But on the other hand, it's one of those mysterious processes where if you have the time, maybe you don't need the language as much as I think you need it. That's a sufficient answer.
Did you find your own demon on Sado?
Yeah, well, yes, actually. In a sense, I did. I suppose in a really strange way. When I started making the film, I didn't really believe in demons. And by the time I finished, I thought, yes, I do actually believe in demons. I mean, by that I mean that I believed in what I was saying a lot more. I think that's what I mean. Of course, I don't believe in supernatural beings, but I think that I do believe, although I'm not a mystic or anything, but I do believe that there are certain kinds of things that we need to explore within our psyches that are really, really important to our survival as a species and as people. So yeah, I did. That's a short answer. His name is Ben.
You said you might comment on the state of the condition of the Japanese film industry right these days.
Yes, it's complicated because in some ways it's rather it's improved, I think, a lot since the earthquake, in the sense that I see a darker and more interesting cinema. I mean, when I say darker, I mean filmmakers now prepared to take on social issues even in mainstream films, which was definitely missing, and which was one of the things that was bothering me before the earthquake, that everything was so fluffy and lacking in bite and satire or social comment, and that since the earthquake now I've seen some rather amazing films. There's a wonderful, I don't know if you've seen Kazoku no Kuni, it's a fantastic drama about North Korean resident Japanese that was just one of the, is a real masterpiece, I think. And even some mainstream stuff from last year was going into territory that mainstream films weren't going into, I think, 2 years ago. So in that sense, it's good. In the broader sense, it's a very messed up kind of industry because a lot of the mid-level distribution companies collapsed after the Lehman shock. So leaving independent producers in a very precarious situation, whereas you can get the money, you can usually cobble together the money to make a film, but the difficult thing is then getting it out to the audience, and that's where you do need a partnership with a distributor, and there aren't many left now who can work with independents. So you either sort of jump up and work with the majors, which obviously everybody wants to do, but then you're in a different kind of bureaucracy. Or you do what I see a lot of filmmakers doing, myself included, which is kind of attempting these kind of self-distribution or new kinds of distribution models and working in different kinds of ways to try and put the film together in the first place. It's not at all healthy compared to some other places, but then again, the film industries in Europe are also suffering from, I mean, everybody's suffering from this, the demise of DVD and video. And, how are we going to, and the fact that people aren't going to the theatres anymore. So how are films going to make their money back? And that's the big question that all over the world everybody's asking. When is VOD going to result in money coming back to the producers or the investors?
Hello.
Hello.
Could you talk a little bit about your casting process? Is it difficult to find actors? Do you have actors in mind prior to the casting? And would there be certain things you did with actors, if, for instance, maybe the Caliban part that you would like to see an actor do and you ask them to do a certain thing? Or how do you go about your casting?
In a variety of ways. I mean, sometimes I have an actor in mind. For example, the Caliban actor was an actor who I appeared in my second film in a small role. And I was so impressed with him, and I knew he was really, really good. I always had him in mind for this part. And I was trying to track him down. He dropped out of his agency. And I was asking around, where's he gone to? Finally managed to get a phone number and phone him up, and he said, oh, I've given up. I've cut my ties with the agency. I'm fed up of getting all these small parts. I'm going to set up a restaurant. And I said, can't you just do one more film? please, I've got this role for you. It's quite big too. So we met in a coffee shop. He was very kind of shifty about it. He said, I'll give you an answer in a week. And I was expecting him to say no, but he said, no, I will, I'll do it. And then he came to Sado, and he did the film, and at the end he said, you know what, I had so much fun doing this, I'm going to go and go back to my agency and ask if they'll take me back. And since then, he's been working ever since. He's just done, he can't come tomorrow because he's doing a Miike Takashi film. And he's worked with Harada, and he's been working solidly ever since. So there's that. There's some actors that I know who I like. And then for Eguchi-san, for example, everybody was telling me, you've got to see Eguchi Noriko, you've got to see Eguchi Noriko. I saw her tapes, and I wasn't really that impressed. And then I met her, I saw a play she was in, and I thought, oh, okay, now I can see what people are talking about. And then I met her, and she's very mysterious, and but I got a really good feeling, so that was just a feeling kind of thing. And then Honda-san, obviously, when you're coming to cast an older, more established male actor, then you're getting into the problems of who's available and whose schedule is going to work. So it's a different kind of casting. But I love to audition. I mean, if I could audition everybody, I would. And I would do. And the band I auditioned for 4 hours. We played games for 4 hours. Just because they never acted before. So different methods.
What motivated you?
Sorry, you need to use
What motivated you most to make a Japanese film with Japanese actors? I mean, there would be many difficulties to understand for each other because of the intercultural differences, and then but you have kept on doing. So, what motivated you most?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I had a certain point, I think it was before, I made a film in 2000, which was released in 2001 called Ichiban Utsukushi Natsu, which had all Japanese actors. And up till that point, there had always been, I'd made lots of short films, and there had always been a foreign character. And the film I made before Firefly Dreams, before Ichiban Utsukushi Natsu, was a story about a foreign bar hostess who has a very bad night. It was kind of a comedic suspense film. And when the film was finished, I thought, I've said everything I have to say about foreigners in Japan, and it's really not that interesting. It's not that interesting to me, and I don't think it's interesting to Japanese audiences, and I don't think it's interesting to audiences outside Japan. I don't think that's. I think there are films to be made, but I just felt that I couldn't make any. It would be foolish for me to keep on making that kind of film. And having been in Japan 10 years by that stage, I thought I need to start making films about Japan, and that means Japanese actors, Japanese stories, Japanese settings. And I'm not. I am writing things with foreign characters in now again. Even kind of surprised myself, but I started slipping some foreign characters in because in Tokyo you meet lots of foreigners. This is a multicultural city, so I'm not ruling them out, but it's just I think it's maybe a sort of an awareness of the audience too. If you want to make I think that films with foreign characters in Japan probably wouldn't play that well in film festivals, maybe too. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm thinking that they would be probably be perceived as being somehow not quite Japanese. trying to think of a good. Can you think of a good example, Karen, one that works or has worked on that?
Lost in translation.
Lost in translation. Yeah, right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. But I think of Lost in Translation, which I quite like. I think of that basically as a film about foreigners in a foreign country, not specifically about Japan. It could have been anywhere. It could have been Lost in Translation in Serbia or whatever. Somebody, you look as if you have a, you look as if you have a question.
I want to ask one question. I wonder if this, do y'all have an English version of your movie?
Yes, yes. I'm sorry. It will be shown with subtitles
Oh, no.
every night.
Oh, you can't? Okay.
Thanks to Karen, who persuaded me that that was the right way to go. Thank you, Karen.
Yes, because, yeah, I can't see Japanese movies because they don't have, like, a lot of times they don't have subtitles.
Yes.
So that's kind of,
Yes.
I like, but this looks good and I would like to see it, but I need to understand it
Yeah.
before I can enjoy it.
Yes, definitely. No, I totally agree. And you know, I was battling a little bit with my producer. My producer was saying to me, "Oh, you know, not many foreigners will come and see it anyway, and the Japanese audience doesn't want to see the subtitles. It's kind of, it's bothersome for them." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I think they'll get over it." It's like, and there are a lot of foreigners in Tokyo, and I would like people to see the film. So in the end, I won the argument that it's going to be shown with English subtitles every night. Please tell everybody you know that, because I think the word hasn't got out enough yet.
Yes, thanks again for making that decision.
Yes,
And I'm sorry to criticize, but I think that what you showed tonight doesn't at all represent how stunningly beautiful this film is. It's mesmerizing and transfixing. It's so beautiful. And the music is also absolutely fabulous. So please, everyone, make sure you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. That's Karen, my promoter. Thank you. I mean, that's nothing to do with me. The cinematographer is very gifted, and he did. I think he has captured the beauty of the island, and the band is very good. And the composer, the Polish composer, who composed the score that's not rock and roll, is also very talented. So there is a lot of talent on display in the film that has nothing to do with me, and people's work that deserves to be seen and heard.
Hello again. How many people on the crew were Japanese, especially head people like the cinematographer and the AD or anything like that?
Everybody was Japanese apart from the composer of the score, who was Polish, who wasn't on the shoot. Yeah. The money is from outside Japan, but the crew are all Japanese. So the producer, one of the producers is British, and he was there for about 5 days. He was one of the few people who flew into Japan after March 11th. I said to him, you know, Paul, you don't have to come. It's okay, I'll understand if you don't come. He said, I'm not going to miss this for the world. And he came. So, yeah, everybody was Japanese.
Did you use professional actors, or did you cast any local people that you thought had interesting faces? Or?
A lot of the extras and even some of the speaking lines outside the main roles are some of the Sado Film Commission people. In fact, the guy we met originally at the Film Commission fair in Tokyo, he has quite a big role. You see him, he's a big bulky guy, you see him carrying a gun. And there's a scene where people are panning for gold on the beach. Those are all local civil servants on a Sunday.
What about the 60-year-old dancer? Is he in it?
The dancer, no, unfortunately, I wanted him to be in it at the end, but he had seriously actually pulled a muscle dancing for us that night, so he couldn't. showed it last year during the Earth celebration. I think you need to talk. You need to ask the question into the mic so everybody can hear it.
Oh, yeah, I asked if it had a screening on Sado Island yet, and what the reception was, how it went down.
Yeah, we showed it during the Earth celebration, which is the Kodo Drummers annual festival. So it was part of that festival last year, and in a hall, because there aren't any movie theatres. So we basically rigged up a speaker system in the hall. Good, it was good. The people liked it. Even some of the older people who came said they really enjoyed it, especially kind of seeing Sado, the way that the landscape had been captured in the film. Nobody's said on Sado has said anything negative to me about the film, actually, which I'm very happy about. I don't know what they think privately. I would imagine some people are not happy about it, but maybe a lot of people are not happy about it. Also, people who haven't seen it. You know, it's a small island. It's a small world. There are a lot of jealousies, a lot of rivalries. I'm sure there are people who think, you know, what's this guy doing making a film about Jintoku as a rock and roll star? But you know, when we showed it, people were saying that they liked it, so that was nice.
Are you happy with it yourself?
Very happy, yes. I mean, I understand that it's a weird film. You know, when I started the production process, the process of developing it, I wasn't aware of what a weird film it would become. And my sister often says to me, "Oh, you haven't made another weird film again, have you, John? Why can't you make a nice film about dogs for a change?" One day I'll have to make a nice film about dogs just to please my sister. Well, you know, I like dogs, and I think there probably is a nice dog film to be made. But I'm happy. I mean, I'm happy with this, although I understand that it's an oddball. It's definitely an oddball, but I feel quite pleased with it. I think there was a question.
You mentioned something like Brazil.
Yes.
I missed some words, so you're going to show this film in the Brazil?
It's been selected for a festival called Fantas Poa, which is a fantastic film festival in Porto Alegre, in the south of Brazil.
I see.
So it's going to be shown there in May. In competition, which is good. So hopefully it will win a prize or something. Or hopefully I can go. I've always wanted to go to Brazil.
I see. I got some idea. You might accept, I don't know. I launched our NPO after 3/11, 2 years ago. And I got some good request from Brazil, from the group of Japanese, Brazilian, second and the third generation. And you said you used to work for Sankesho, right?
Yes.
So if you show this film in Brazil, in the Japan Festival in July, I know the date exactly, you could contribute to industry, agency of industry or tourism to donate some mentally or some, financially to the Japanese, I guess.
So there is a festival in July?
No, July, 20 and the 21st. And I got some good news from our São Paulo newspaper. So I might help you.
Thank you.
And you could help those, devastated place in Ghent.
Yes. No, I would love to.
Is it possible?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, thanks so much.
I'll have to. July should be fine because it's after the other festival. If it's before the other festival, they might get angry. But if it's after,
You will help,
Yeah,
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you. I also produced another film last year which is actually about Nikkei Brazilians in Japan. That was set in Nara. The young guy who produced this directed his first feature film called Akane Iro no Yakusoku, which is a story about a young Japanese Brazilian boy. It's kind of a very whimsical, it's kind of a children's film, it's a family film, which should be coming out later this year. I think is that anybody it's about? No, that's fine. Thank you for coming. Please come to the theatre and see the film.
Yes.
I can make just a quick remark before you leave. Al, do you want to? Yeah. I like this. Thank you.
Everyone, thank you for coming out. If you could please leave your meishi. We'd like to add you to our mailing list if you're not already on it. Also, we have a little donation box over there. We're a non-profit educational institution, but in this last year we produced over 40 evening lectures and events, and there are some logistical costs, so if you're feeling generous, appreciate it. So we do have upcoming events. One event that I would like to mention is a documentary filmmaker, Reggie Life, has made a documentary about an American jet teacher who died in the tsunami in Tohoku. She was working in Ishinomaki. That film was called The Taylor Anderson Project. And on Wednesday, May 6th, he's going to screen that film. He's going to screen the entire film and then speak quite briefly after. So if you'd like to come to that, thank you.
Thank you, Kyle, and thanks everybody for turning out on a rainy night.